Greetings, friend, and welcome to the Between the Covers podcast, where we are working every day to remove the self-limiting beliefs that are preventing us from becoming the heroes of our own stories. I am Marcus Barr, and today I want to talk about something that I find to be very important when we are interacting pretty much with anyone in our day-to-day life. And this is the notion of reserving judgment. This actually is a conversation I've had with many clients in the past. This is something I've had conversations with friends and family about as well. And another inspiration for this conversation came again from the awesome work of Tori and Benjamin Faye of the White Homework podcast. They released a podcast called The Science of Scarcity, What Poverty Does to the Brain. And it's a very interesting look at what can happen to people's minds and bodies when they go through these adverse experiences, such as being unhoused. And it was a part of a series that they had done where they were talking about this issue, specifically through the lens of individuals who are of colored or really just black, but it does occur with pretty much every non-white individual out there, at least here in the US. And there's a lot that I could say about this, and pretty much the main thing that I want to start off with, and this is going to kind of be the thesis of this entire episode, is it's important for us to withhold judgment of others until we know their story. And the important thing about this is typically once we know more of someone else's story, I often find it that I am less likely to judge them. A great example of this with Tori and Benji, as they were talking about some of the prejudices that they had experienced because of poverty or homelessness in their history, is there's this dynamic, especially here in the United States, that if we don't have hard work for us to pursue, that we're going to become lazy. And I'm going to use my wonderful partner Libby as an example here, because typically with her, I am having to remind her to get some rest. She has so many things that she wants to do with her free time. She has woodworking projects. She wants to make dice. She wants to paint. She's really getting into cosplay right now and is working on coming up with a costume for the next D&D character that she's going to portray. She has a lot of things that she wants to do with her free time. And I can assure you, if she didn't have hard work for her to do on a daily basis, she wouldn't be lazy and just sit around and do nothing. She would have things that she would devote her time to. I feel a big thing as well when we're talking about, in a lot of cases, the judgments that we will sometimes unconsciously, sometimes consciously make against other people, is we look at something that they have done as a moral failing, or not something that they have done, but the result as a moral failing. And what do I mean by this? Let's use the example of being homeless, as mentioned in the White Homework episode. And I can attest to this personally, and this is something that I have had to wrestle with a lot, is I would go to grocery stores, I would be driving around. Here we're having a much larger unhoused population over here in southeastern Washington state. And since I was a young child, I would look at these people and would think that they had done something wrong that got themselves there. And some of this was taught. This was stuff that I had heard from other people. I remember hearing the story of, I think it was my great-great-grandfather, or no, maybe just my great-grandfather, but my dad's dad, when he was a young child, was out for a walk with his dad and a load of siblings. I think he had like 14 siblings or something like that. And there was this man who approached his father and was just asking for some cash, just asking for some money, some assistance. And my great grandfather was like, yeah, sure, I can give you some money to help. And the guy thanked him and then started to walk away. And before he turned a corner, he turned around and said, "Sucker," and then bolted. That was a story I heard growing up, that there was some kind of morally black reason for why I shouldn't help people. Considering that I grew up Christian, where I was told that I needed to help the orphans and the widows and those who were less fortunate than me. Here I am hearing stories about how it's not a good thing to give money to these people, because what if they're just going to use it to buy drugs or to buy alcohol? Well, what if they did? For one thing, it's not really my responsibility to follow up on these people. And yet, there are a lot of these individuals who have lost their homes, or who have lost their jobs, or who just have a really hard time because of medical bills or automotive problems, you name it. There's a lot of things that can be causing the hardships that these people are going through. And yet, for so long, I would look at people who were panhandling and they'd hold up signs pretty much saying anything would help. And I would look at them and I would judge them as being morally abhorrent individuals, that there was something they had done that had caused that. Something that they had done that caused them to lose their house or to lose their job, or that they just were not using their money well, and oh, well, now here's the natural consequences of that. However, the more I start to hear about other people's stories, the more I am beginning to realize that something like poverty, it really isn't a moral failing at all. There's usually so much more going on beneath the surface and in someone else's story than just the fact that they made some poor choices. I remember when I was in high school and my parents divorced. My mom was the one who kept the house. And there were so many weeks and even months where my mom didn't know where we were going to get the money for food. And she would constantly make comments about how we were just going to have to live off of weenies and beans for the next week until the next paycheck, and we were going to be able to actually have some money for food again. What if someone saw my mom in that situation? And she has this split level home, the home that I grew up in. And she was determined to keep us in this home and to keep us in the same school district that we had been in and not separate us from our friends. And yet people would maybe hear that we were struggling to make ends meet. How would they have judged her in that situation? Oh, maybe she shouldn't have gotten divorced. And
that's kind of her fault. Well, no, not really. A divorce is usually the fault of two people because it takes at least two people to make a relationship work. But that kind of situation, that is not something that I would want to judge my mom for, because she did a lot to try and help make sure that I was still where my friends were and I still went to the same school and I had that consistency. I think about how I used a lot of video games as a distraction during those dark years of my high school years after my parents divorced. I wouldn't want people to look at me and just say, oh, he's just lazy. You just need to put him to work, or he needs to have a job, or he just needs to have something to do other than playing video games, like put him in sports or something like that. When I was literally running away from all of this pain that I had in my life and the whole mental turmoil that I had surrounding the loss of my family in that regard, having to wrestle with the truth that I was now from a broken family. Now, my time would be split between two different houses at least. And I'd have to be careful about what I was hearing from family, about what one side was saying about the other, and vice versa. To me, I wasn't being lazy. I was coping. And it was one of the only ways I knew how to handle that. I didn't know how to handle the emotional turmoil that came from being a child of a divorced family. And there's also this notion that because I'm able to do something, then that means everyone can. That's not entirely true. In fact, it's something that I try and be careful to share with clients when I'm helping them work through their maladaptive coping mechanisms, because I will oftentimes use myself as an example, that because of the history that I have, because of the experiences that I grew up with, because of the depth of my coping for all of these years, that if I was able to overcome, then pretty much anyone else can. However, that's not entirely true. Not everyone is going to be able to work through the way that I did. Not everyone is going to be able to process. Not everyone's going to have the same level of support to get through these difficult situations, to work through their story and their past. Not everyone is going to have the resources available to them. And as Tori and Benji are having this conversation, one of the things that they bring up is about how the system doesn't work for everyone. It really doesn't. If you say to someone, hey, if I was able to find a job, then certainly you can too. Well, what if you don't have the right ID in order to get this job? Oh, well, you just need to get the ID. Well, what if you are unable to provide a birth certificate to show where you were born, have that information? What if the names didn't match between what's on your ID and what's on your birth certificate? This is something that Benji went through. And this was when he was unhoused. He was unhoused for a good while because he could not get help in the system to reconcile this mistake. Social Security office was like, there's not much I can do. And whatever other agencies he worked with, they're like, there's nothing we can do. he couldn't just pick himself up in order to change his circumstances, because he literally did not have the same opportunities afforded to him as someone like me, who is a white American cisgendered man. So saying that someone is just not doing what they need to because I was able to get through this, and I'll give them the 10-step process in order to figure it out, because it's the same 10-step process that I went through, and they just need to follow that and they'll be able to work through and overcome whatever they're going through. It's important for us to reserve judgment, because that's literally not true for everyone. And there is so much that lives in our minds and our bodies that really makes a judgment an unfair comparison. This is something I tell all of my clients, is we can't compare ourselves to others, which is typically what happens when we're making a judgment. We're looking at someone and comparing it to what we've done, and it's like, okay, yeah, you could be doing better. Let's face it, there are so many judgments that are just demeaning other people and inflating ourselves that it's kind of hard for me to think of an example where there is a judgment. It's like, oh man, they're doing so much better than I am. If I only had what they had. Oh, I guess that does happen. But whenever we compare ourselves to others, it's always going to be an unfair comparison. I've already shared about my work and my continual work of reserving judgment when I see individuals who are unhoused and they're holding up signs pretty much saying anything will help. I'll work for food. I'm homeless, and my brain wants to jump to, oh, what did you do to get yourself there? Especially when I see these people who still have a phone and who are smoking cigarettes or something like that. And I'm just like, how much money are you spending on this phone and on these cigarettes and everything? And yet, that's likely just a drop in the bucket of what they actually need in order to survive. And let's face it, for a lot of these people, they're just coping as best as they can and trying to work through some of these difficult times. Around here, we kind of need more low-income housing. But based on a lot of the bullshit that happens with NIMBY, I'm not going to be surprised if they're just going to continue building larger and grander homes around here in order to try and, just feed this housing market where people are just wanting bigger and better and larger, and that's not what most people can afford. Libby and I, we live in a decent home, and the only reason why we're able to get it is thanks to my mom. Otherwise, I don't know where we would be. It was only thanks to the generosity of my mother that Libby and I are able to afford this house that we love and that we can share with friends and family. But there's a lot of people that don't have that same privilege, that same situation. There are couples that simultaneously lost their jobs. I hear that trying to get unemployment or even like food stamps these days, with all of the budget cuts and just the hacking away at our government's infrastructure and its social safety net, it is making it impossible for people to get some of the help that they need in order to get back on their feet. And so I used to see these people who were homeless, and I would just say, well, why don't they just get a job? Well, if they don't have a home, how can they have a job? In fact, I believe I've even said this on a recent episode. If you're applying for a job, having an address is typically one of the first questions that must be answered on an application. If you don't have a home, if you don't have a house of your own, it's kind of hard to get a job. And if we don't have things like low-income housing in order to make it so that people can actually afford a place to stay, then we're just perpetuating the problem. And I'll admit, that's a judgment right there. And I think one of the most prominent examples in recent memory was back in 2023 when Libby had her mental health crisis. That was such a dark time for us. And I remember weeks where all Libby did was sit on the couch and do things on her phone, distract herself with stuff on her phone, and like watch videos on YouTube or watch episodes of The Middle. That was a really difficult time. And yet I know that if people saw her, that I was doing all the work around the house. Oh, we were needing to get help from friends and family. There were some days when, or there was even like a week or two when Libby's mom had to come stay with us just to help us get through this very trying time. But if people saw her just sitting on the couch on her phone for hours and hours and hours throughout the day, what kind of judgments would they make about her? That she's just being lazy. She just needs to get to work. Whatever's going on, she just needs to get over it. I'm sorry, she was having suicidal thoughts. That's not something you can just get over. As someone who has struggled with that personally myself, you can't just get over it. We can't just get over the fear that can be so overwhelming when some of these life challenges happen. And that is why it is so important for us to just hold back our judgments of others until we know their story. Let's face it. When we see someone who's showing some signs of moral failing based on what our society deems as being a moral failure, we usually don't ask these people what brought them there and what's going on, what they're thinking, and what they're feeling. In fact, I would say for most people, if you were to ask them what they're feeling, they probably couldn't give you an answer because we're so disconnected from our feelings in American society for, God, it seems like almost the vast majority of the population, that we just come to conclusions ourselves. They have some kind of addiction. They made some poor choices. Maybe they lost their job because of something that they had done that they weren't supposed to. Maybe it was from embezzling. Maybe it was from just not listening to their superiors. Maybe they did something in a very dangerous way and it's like, nope, we can't have that, you're out. And we make these snap decisions in sometimes seconds of seeing someone in these situations. And we immediately make a judgment. I want to encourage you, hold back on those judgments. If you're not willing to take the time to listen to their story and see what's actually going on and what's brought them to where they are, then I can almost guarantee you, you're going to get the answer wrong. You're going to make the wrong assessment and you're going to pass a cruel judgment against someone else, whether they know it or not, just with your own biases. And this is something I still have to do. I still have to be careful because it's so easy for these old thoughts and patterns to come up in my life. And I'm getting better about noticing when I start having these judgmental thoughts. And I'm still a work in progress. So give yourself the time. Give yourself the time to make these changes. Reserve the judgment. Show compassion. Show empathy and grace to these people who, in many ways, may be less fortunate than you are. Maybe don't have the same leg ups that you're accustomed to. Maybe the system is working for you, but it's not working for them because the system was designed for someone like you. We can't know that. We can't know until we engage with their story. One last reminder before I end this episode is, if you have any questions or comments about this or anything else that I've talked about here, you can get in touch with me. You can send an email to questions.btcpod@gmail.com, and I would love to interact and engage with you however I can with that. And if you have any questions or even ideas for people that we can research or interview for future hero studies, then please send those my way. And until next time, live strong for today.